Now, in terms of poetry, I've created a number of clusters, if you will, or modules with different themes, and I'll just briefly state those, and then you can check out the content on the site. One of the themes, a fairly obvious one, is seasonal cycles. Our relationship to nature is circumscribed by the seasonal changes. In exploring how these poets respond to the unique qualities of the seasons, students may wish to discuss how the seasons manifest themselves where they live and try their own hand at finding the poetic language that would best convey their own emotional response to the yearly cycle of change. Poems in this cluster include Keats's To Autumn, Edward Hirsch's Fall, and Dave Lucas's poem November, to name a few. Another cluster I've entitled Nature Woven into a Culture and Lifestyle. It strikes me that while many of our students live in a suburban environment, we have many students who still live in pristine rural areas. And I was reminded of Janice Ray's memoir of a Cracker Childhood, in which she talks about living amongst the longleaf pine forest and how it shaped her childhood, cooking over fat pine, building playhouses out of the pine straw. Her observation that our lives are woven intimately into the fabric of the natural environment in which we grow might prove a useful topic for conversation with students in discussing these poems and prompt them to consider how the loss of nature may be felt personally, culturally, as well as ecologically. Some of the poems in this culture include Snapping Beans by Lisa Parker, The Cow by Andrew Huggins, Birches by Robert Frost, and others. I've titled the next cluster Nature as Other, the Post-Descartes Paradigm Shift. And this particular work was inspired by a work by Robert Bly called News of the Universe, Poems of Twofold Consciousness. In this book, Robert Bly introduces his thesis, and he refers to what he calls the old position. He says of Descartes' philosophy, or he describes it, consciousness is human and involves a reason. A serious gap exists between us and the rest of nature. Nature is to be watched, pitied, and taken care of if it behaves. That is, of course, Rye's distillation of Descartes' philosophy, the old position, as he calls it. The poems in this cluster invite the reader to consider the ecological implications of humans seeing themselves as apart from non-human nature. And one of the poems that comes immediately to mind that I've included is William Blake's London. Since many of us teach formal analysis and look carefully at poetic diction and poetic devices, I've included a cluster called Poetic Diction and the Practice of Precise Observation of Nature. Many academic disciplines and careers require the skill of close observation and exact reporting of detail. These skills often employ the power of poetic language and literary devices, as witnessed in the poems in this group. A deeper understanding of our relationship with the natural world is enhanced by our ability to identify and describe its features. Poems in this group include Elizabeth Bishop's The Fish and The Ovenbird by Robert Frost, for example. Another cluster I've titled The Natural Cycle of Birth, Life, Death, and Rebirth. The pre-Socratics believed that the world existed in a constant state of flux, and the concept of mutability informs the poems in this group. The poems reflect the author's attempts to explore in non-human nature their own passage through the portal of time. Perhaps our ties to and responsibility towards the natural world would be enhanced by a greater appreciation of both its ephemerality and capacity for regeneration. The next cluster I've called Reading Globally, Thinking Locally. This cluster allows students particularly to focus on Florida and regional poetry, regional works. Regionalism and a sense of place are significant features of nature-based literature. Exploring the intimacies of place-bound poetry can awaken us to a world we've yet really to see in person, perhaps, and to see the landscapes we call our own with fresh eyes. If the poet is someone able to see the world, quote, as if for the first time, perhaps readers of poetry can be inspired to do so as well. And poems in this group include Gail Whitehead's Dead Armadillos and Robert Shaw's Wild Turkeys, two critters that certainly our students have encountered, even if as roadkill. Nature and Romantic Poetry is the title of the next cluster. The relationship between love and nature is an enduring one, most famously exemplified in the works of Shakespeare and the Romantic poets such as Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, and Blake. But the diverse manner in which poets marry aspects of the natural world with their personal lives or attitudes about love and romance suggest, from a psychological perspective, the very diversity of romantic and erotic experience itself. This group includes poems by Billy Collins, William Blake, Sharon Olds, and William Butler Yeats. Another cluster or module I've entitled Looking Inward, Looking Outward. For many poets, nature serves perhaps as a sort of Rorschach, inviting the author to project their inner feelings in the form of an emotional response to some aspect of the natural world. It might be the contemplation of their own ephemerality, processing stormy emotions, or the sense of emotional release in the sight of nature's grandeur and mystery. Students and readers of poetry have no doubt had similar experiences in nature to which they can relate. Becoming more mindful of our emotional linkage with non-human nature might be an essential ingredient in becoming better environmental stewards. This group includes poems like Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, Ruth Fairlight's Crocuses, and Mary Oliver's Wild Geese.